What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Thursday, August 23rd, 2018, and we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. And the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments and questions. And our third hour guest today is going to be Don Wiskin of Extendivite. Once again, we're having him on the show in an age where people are becoming very concerned about what the big pharmaceutical companies are pushing. More and more people, and Claire and I are among them, we're turning back to traditional herbal known medicines, and really we're getting so cautious and so scared of the medical industrial complex. Right now, medical mistakes are the third leading cause of death in this country, right after cancer and heart disease. And nobody makes a big deal about that in the corporate media. They're always about, we've got to get the guns. We've got to get the guns. Your guns are dangerous. Guns are nowhere near as dangerous as doctors. You're 8,000 times more likely to be killed by your doctor than by somebody with a gun. Anyway, I want to make a point of thanking everybody who's been sending in emails of concern here about our hurricane. And it's nasty. It's the biggest storm in the last quarter of a century. And the good news is the predicted storm track is continuing to drift toward the west. So the actual eye of the hurricane, which would be the most destructive, is not expected to make landfall anywhere. Now, it's going to get close to us here on Oahu. First thing Saturday morning, we're already under rain and a bit of wind, but we've already hunkered down and made all the preparations that we can. But they are taking the storm very, very seriously. Obviously, the people in the inundation areas are being asked to evacuate and head for the shelters that have already been opened up. Schools are closed, businesses are closed. Everyone's being told shelter in place until the storm is past. And so there's a great deal of concern out here. But as I said, the good news is it's weakening as it moves north, and the center of the storm, the eye of the storm, is drifting even further west. So barring something unexpected from the atmosphere, it's going to be bad. It won't be as bad as it potentially could have been. What's really interesting is there's two different layers in the atmosphere. And you've got the lower level atmosphere is moving west and taking the hurricane with it. The upper level, though, is actually trying to blow eastward. So it's a bit of a tug of war. But the lower level has more mass and therefore more effect, and looks like it's going to be winning. So, but time will tell. Time will tell. But Claire and I are hunkered down, and we've got water. We've wind-proofed our residence here, and except for choir rehearsal and church, we have no plans to go anywhere at all until after this storm is over. But it's still a Category 4 hurricane. There have been heavy rains on the Big Island. There's been massive flooding down there. There's concern that some of the there could be some landslides down there as well. And I think I mentioned this before, but I'll mention it again. All of the ships and submarines down in Pearl Harbor were ordered to leave the port, and they've sailed off to the northeast to get as far away from the storm as they can, because any ships tied up to docks when the storm surge is coming on in, they're going to get slammed back and forth against the pier, which can damage the ship, damage the pier. So they're getting out of there, and I imagine the same is true for all the commercial shipping over in the port of Honolulu. So they are taking this seriously, and there's been a lot of panic buying. Stores have just been emptied of basic emergency supplies like bottled water and everything. There's actually been a call on out for the U.S. government to issue waivers for what's called the Jones Act for Hawaii. so that emergency supplies can get to this state much more easily. Now, the Jones Act is basically part of the Merchant Marine Act, and it goes back almost 100 years. And this act was introduced by Senator Wesley Jones. And basically, it said that all goods transported by water between U.S. ports be carried on U.S. flagged ships constructed in the United States, owned by U.S. citizens, and crewed by U.S. citizens and U.S. permanent residents. So basically, if you're going port to port in the United States, it must be a U.S. ship. Waivers have been issued for the Jones Act in situations like this, which would basically say that any ship from any country that just happens to be conveniently positioned can be called upon to bring, several containers of Spam to Hawaii, should that be needed after it's over. My sense of it is, it's going to be bad. It's not going to be as bad as it might have been. And this is a thank goodness we've dodged a bullet here, because it was a bad storm, but it's a near miss, not a direct hit. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are rejoining the network, and we're going to get into some serious news now. As you know, up in Afghanistan, things have not been going well. The U.S. government has spent more than $700 billion, with a B, of your dollars, of which at least $15 billion was just outright wasted on this war in Afghanistan. And it's been going on for 17, going on 18 years. And Trump is looking for any way to basically bring this to a close. He doesn't want to surrender, doesn't want to give up. So he's talking to Eric Prince, the former boss at Blackwater, the founder of Blackwater. And this would be an epic disaster, because Prince's priorities in Afghanistan don't line up with Trump's. Now, apparently, his Afghan war plan was published by BuzzFeed News back in December of last year, in which he proposed plundering Helmand Province of approximately $1 trillion worth of lithium, uranium, phosphorus, and other rare elements. Now, that would be a political disaster, because the jihadi narrative all along has been that the U.S. government is a purely predatory imperial force focused on enriching itself and weakening Muslim countries. I have no idea where they would have gotten an idea like that, but that's what the jihadis are saying. And if Eric Prince were to take over Afghanistan and go through with his plan to basically plunder all this mineral wealth, the jihadis could say, see, we were right. Down in Syria, they're starting to, shall we say, tally up the numbers now that they're very close to the end of this war. And the Russian Defense Ministry released a video providing some numbers on the current results of its operation in Syria. And according to the video, the Russian military has destroyed 121,000 terrorist objects, meaning weapons, supplies, what have you, and eliminated over 86,000 terrorists, including 830 commanders, since the start of its anti-terrorist campaign in the country. It's good work, actually. And according to the report, 63,000 Russian servicemen, including 434 generals and 25,000 other officers, have gained combat experience during the conflict in Syria. Now, that's very important, because having combat experience makes you much more effective. So, John Bolton is out there saying that the Russians are stuck in Syria. And this is why the U.S. has an upper hand in any negotiations in the conflict. And Russia's come on back and said, no, we're not stuck here, and you don't have the upper hand in the negotiations for Syria because you're not supposed to be here in the first place. Bolton is also still screaming that Iran must leave Syria. Iran must go. Iran must go. And it's very odd to see the United States in Syria without a UN resolution, without a declaration of war from the Congress, without any legitimate right to be there, standing on Syrian soil and screaming that Russia and Iran have to go because the U.S. just doesn't want them there, even though Russia and Iran are there with the permission of the Syrian government and the United States is not. It is an extreme display of arrogance on the part of Bolton to do that here. Well, once again, they're wagging the dog for chemical attacks against civilians by Assad. And this article over in Investment Watchblog is saying, how many times can they seriously use this same lame accusation when all the past tries have been disproven? Even Mattis has admitted they have no evidence to support the claim that Assad used chemical weapons in the past. And yet here we go again. They're going back to the chemical weapons card, which means they're still looking for some way to escalate the war and get Assad out there. Now, I think it was yesterday we were reporting on this story where the U.S. is blocking any reconstruction aid for Syria until there's a change in the government, meaning they're back to Assad must go. And the United States is using their leverage at the UN to basically prevent the reconstruction. Well, that's not really going to work because Russia and China are already coming on in to help reconstruct Syria, which means Russian and Chinese companies will get all those building contracts. Russian and Chinese banks will be doing the lending and making the interest off that, which means the U.S. not only has failed to remove Assad, they're not going to make any money off of this war, which is, the ultimate aim. The reason you go in, you spend all this money to wreck a country is to make more money back by rebuilding it, throwing them into permanent debt here. Now, Bolton is really strutting his stuff these days, and he's up there saying that the European Union has to choose between Iran and the U.S. It's time for you to make a choice here. And the EU's probably thinking, well, let's give us some time on that one. Give us some time. But Bolton is out there saying Trump wants maximum pressure on Iran. And they're saying that actual regime change is not the policy, but they want to change the regime's behavior. And these reimposed sanctions are meant to bring these changes about, basically curbing Iran's interference in the Middle East, because after all, that's the United States' job. They're cutting in on our action here. And of course, they still want those long-range missiles. Now, Bolton is out there boasting the sanctions are having a significant effect on Iran's economy, but it says, so far, there's no change in the country's policies. The Iranians have been double-crossed by the United States so many times. They're not going to agree to anything because it's no good. The day that Trump pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal destroyed the credibility of the United States of America. Nobody believes our government anymore. And the U.S. is out there. They've weaponized sanctions. They're using them like this big caveman club to just whack on people. You get a sanction, and you get a sanction, and you get a sanction. And if you don't go along with it, we're going to sanction these other people too. Okay. Over in Europe, Putin was sent a question by a Finnish journalist saying that NATO's military infrastructures were moving towards Russia's borders, and the amount of the alliance's military equipment and personnel, as well as the number of military exercises near Russia's borders, were growing. And Putin said, naturally, we have to keep an eye on what's going on there and strengthen our infrastructures. We must respond to the emergence of components of the U.S. missile defense systems near our border, saying that these missile defense systems could be used for launching intermediate range missiles. So edging closer and closer, spending huge amounts of money. And yeah, now I'm sure the corporate media here in the United States is going to scream that, Russia's buildup represents Russian aggression. But, Putin is responding to NATO. Now, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the Russian republics were given a promise. I think it was specifically Mikhail Gorbachev was told NATO will not expand eastward past its current border, which at that time was Germany. And immediately that promise was broken, and they've started trying to grab up all these other Balkan states, and now they're again edging up to the border with Russia, ratcheting up the tensions. Down in Turkey, they're preparing for their first batch of Russian S-400 air defense missiles. Everybody got to see how well those work over in Syria. And as you know, part of the current friction between the United States and Turkey is that Turkey bought these Russian S-400 air defense missiles instead of the U.S. product, which is much more expensive and not seen as being as effective, which sounds like a good idea. But the U.S. attitude is, you will buy our weapons. You're not allowed to buy weapons from Russia. And as a matter of fact, there's this story that came out of antiwar.com where U.S. diplomats have been told to promote U.S. weapons sales in the countries they're assigned to. They're taking these diplomats and they're turning them into salesmen for Lockheed Martin and Boeing and all these other companies, General Dynamics. Just push those American weapons. It's all about making the sale, making the money. Now, right now, the Senate is looking at the 2019 Defense Appropriations Act, and Senator Chris Murphy wanted to include an amendment to withdraw all funding for the U.S. involvement in the war in Yemen. But unfortunately, that attempt was blocked by the Senate leadership, so it will not be included in the 2019 Defense Appropriation Acts. In other words, the Senate just blocked voting to defund the Yemen war. Now, what Chris Murphy wanted to do was to limit U.S. involvement in Yemen to the 2019 NDAA. But Trump's signing statement indicated he doesn't intend to comply with that. This meant using control over the funding through the Appropriations Act was the next real chance to require compliance. I don't like this idea of a signing statement. It's too much power for the president, where he basically gets a bill Congress has crafted and put together, and he signs it, and then he attaches a note saying, I'm not really going to go along with this exactly the way it's written. I'm going to make some changes. That's not in the Constitution. But the upshot of it is that U.S. involvement in illegal wars continues. Down in Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu has announced an additional 1,400 new housing units, settler units, across the occupied West Bank. And it got met with outrage from the settlers. The settlers said, only 1,400? Last year you gave us thousands. This year it's 1,400. They're also complaining that Netanyahu didn't legalize a pair of currently illegal outposts in the West Bank. They're just grabbing the land as fast as they can. And Netanyahu is back to lobbying the U.S. government to recognize Israel's right to the occupied Golan Heights. And he's saying, I will not give up our expectation that the United States recognize Israeli sovereignty over Golan. And this came one day after Bolton told Reuters the U.S. administration was not considering the possibility of recognizing Israel's right to the Syrian area. Now, Israel annexed the Golan Heights. No country on earth has recognized that. All right, we got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I was just checking on the storm during the commercial break and just got a phone call from a family member. They're all worried about it. Apparently, the news reporting on the mainland is they love a good disaster. And again, I don't know how bad it's going to be. I don't think it's going to be as bad as they're making out. It's kind of like the way they reported on the volcanic eruption down on the Big Island. And a lot of people thought the entire state was melting down, or at least the entire Big Island. Again, Saturday we'll know. But there are a lot of thunderstorms trailing in the wake of the actual ice storm itself. But the outer edge of it is overhead right now. All right, let's take a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, I was always scared of you with the volcano and stuff. I'm like, I hope he has a rowboat ready with him and Claire so they can like rowboat out of it.
Well, the good news is the island we're on, the volcano is extinct because there's really actually only one hot spot, and the Pacific Ocean plate drags over it heading northwest, and it pops up new little cones. But the active volcanoes down on the Big Island and all the rest of the archipelago, there's nothing going on there.
Hey, Mike, I want to talk about not only is Turkey, but by 2020, India is going to have the S-400, and nothing's going to change that deal now. So India said to the U.S., don't matter what you're going to do, we're still buying the S-400. So that says something.
Yes.
You know, I mean, that says they're moving. And you know, Mike, what's funny? Remember Trump is like, Germany, you're being held hostage by the Russians with the natural gas. And then buy some of our natural gas from the liquid. I mean,
yes.
Come on. It's all about business.
Yep.
What a joke.
It is.
The same with the weapons, you know? Yeah, what a joke. I mean, geez. I mean, buy our weapons. Don't buy their. I mean, this is the kind of crap that we've come to. You know what I mean? Like, this is it, you know? I mean, what about, hey, don't buy their infrastructure, Syria. Buy ours. You know what, Mike? What you said it today also with the U.S., but the UN, political part of the UN, is not allowing reconstruction of Syria. So the UN is a dirty pile of crap, too.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Because it's sad. The UN is a joke. You know, why do they even exist anymore? They're just a money launderer. I mean, what's your take on the UN now? I mean, I don't think they're legitimate at all anymore.
Well, they're heavily politicized. They're just as corrupt as any other government structure here. And I actually have a contact inside the United Nations who has shared some stories about just how unimaginably corrupt they are over there. But they are basically under the sway of both the United States and, through the United States, Israel. Basically, the U.S. has commandeered the United Nations to block Syria's reconstruction until there's a change of government, meaning Assad must go and a government we like gets put on in. And I mean, we were in Syria 7 years and couldn't pull it off. And
France and Britain too, Mike. They're part of the problem too.
Well, I don't think they were all that enthusiastic about being there. They were there because the U.S. said we need to look like a coalition, so it's not just the U.S. whooping on Syria. But apparently, there's a story that just came on out here in Fort Russ, where apparently somebody has leaked it out that the White Helmets are planning a staged chemical attack in Idlib in order to justify a U.S. airstrike that would target the Syrian forces. I hope they're not dumb enough to target the Russian forces. But that's where all this talk is coming from. They're looking for a way to rescue the remaining jihadis in Idlib and give them a way out and keep this thing going.
And Mike, did you see there was the Russian military came out and they said that they killed probably about 84,000 terrorists. And I want people to think about that number. 84,000. That's an army. And that's not all of them. That's only a portion. So, I mean, people got to think about this. Where the heck are they all coming from? They're coming from Britain, France, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain.
Yep.
You know, it's a mercenary force. I mean, that's a lot of people. You know what I mean? And you can't take your weapon over there when you're on a flight. So, you know, obviously they were being armed, dropped. You know, we know with the drops and all this and funding and this or that. So, I mean, this is what's been going on.
Yeah.
You know, I know people don't want to hear it. You know, I mean, 84,000 people they killed. They're all terrorists. But that's only probably 1/3, that was, that we know about, because obviously somebody's not counting each one by hand, but I mean, that's a lot of people.
It is a lot of people, and I think your guess that's probably about somewhere between 1/4 and 1/3 of the total forces that were brought into Syria to try and bring Assad down. And now, Assad's military, they're now battle hardened. They're very experienced troops. So are the Russians now. That's an advantage for them. And but listen, stay on the line, Dustin. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Dustin in New Jersey. And Dustin, what we're seeing here today is a continuation of a U.S. government policy that goes back pretty much to the end of World War II. And I think after looking at how destructive World War II had been, and World War I for that matter, that some military people, government people got together and said, well, we need to basically redesign warfare to where we can win control over other countries without trashing them and making them worthless in the process. And that's where this idea of regime changing seems to have originated. That it was far cheaper to simply change the government of a country, sort of a covert colonialism, than to actually physically invade it. And since the end of World War II, the U.S. government has done this more than 50 times, and they succeed about half. And
now, Mike,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yeah, Mike. But the problem is, like, the money we're spending, we don't have.
No, we don't.
And we're ruining our own country in the process. Like we're looting it.
Yep.
And there's more debt than we have dollars to pay for the debt. And so basically they're creating the scenario we're going to collapse. Because they either could have hit the gas pedal on bigger empire, or they could have shrunk the empire by stopping. And they're not stopping, as it seems. So they're actually accelerating the decline, as I see it.
I think they understand that, the United States is in serious trouble, and their idea is to simply gain control over the rest of the world and loot the rest of the world to keep the American system going. Even Eric Prince, with his plan for Afghanistan, just go on in and take all these raw materials, $1 trillion worth of raw materials. And it's basically a phase I think nations go through when they lose their ability to compete peacefully with other countries, because that's really what's at the heart of what's going on here. The United States basically used to make products that were so high quality that people in other countries would buy them even though they were more expensive. And that was a good way to do business. And today, American companies are putting out junk, or they're importing junk, and they pass laws to force people to buy products like vaccines. And then they use diplomatic pressure and arm twist other countries, especially with trade deals, saying, yes, you will buy our products. That was a big part of the Asia-Pacific Economic Treaty, where they wanted to force other countries to buy our GMO agriculture, because other countries don't really want it. But the U.S. is stuck with it. The U.S. government is now stuck with the fact that the majority of our agricultural industry is contaminated with GMOs and glyphosate, and as world awareness of the dangers of these products grows, nobody wants our product. And so these companies are still allowed to sell it to us. I got more about that a little bit later on in the show here, but other countries don't want it, so they have to be forced, just like U.S. diplomats are now arm twisting other countries to buy U.S. products, even though they're more expensive and not as good.
Yeah, but Mike, China, in terms of the PPP, which is the, I forgot that, that's the economic number. They're the number one economy in the world. They're 10% per year, and we're only at, like, if you believe the numbers, 2. I mean, you can't compete. You'll never compete. So I mean, it's going to lead you basically to a world war, or you're going to just be in decline because we're not going to beat the Chinese and the Russians. So like then you're in decline.
Yeah,
that's it. And you just got to, you know what I mean. And Mike, did you see this CNN report with the satellite? A satellite within a satellite within a satellite, kind of like those dolls they got, the Russian dolls.
Yep.
Where there's a doll within a doll. Now, do you believe that story? Like, you know what, Mike? I do believe that they have the technology to have a satellite within a satellite in a satellite, but I don't believe it could be for weaponized. It could be for repairing another satellite or observing another satellite. But they make it like CNN, like they're weaponizing space. I'm like, well, what was Star Wars about back in the 80s? Obviously, that was fictitious, but still, it was the same. Well, BS, right? I mean,
there are multi-component satellites going, way back. I mean, some of the early CIA spy satellites in the days before they had video feeds or digital, they had film cameras, and they'd launch this big satellite, and it would have 6 smaller satellites inside that basically carried the film canisters. And when one film canister was used up, they would eject that satellite. It would re-enter. Led to a whole lot of talk about UFOs, and that was how they did that. Don't forget that Apollo involved spacecraft within spacecraft, or at least docked together. So did Viking, for that matter. It's not that big a deal, but I agree with you. It's gratuitous Russia bashing. Anyway, listen, Dustin, I need to let you go. I've got another caller on the line I need to get to, so thank you for the phone call. And let's switch over to Kevin in West Virginia. Aloha, Kevin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mr. Mike. What's on my mind is all of this domestic stuff that's going on here in the United States. For the life of me, I really don't understand this whole Cohen thing. I know it's complete garbage and everything like that. Like, they're trying to make Cohen flip and Manafort flip. But what does paying off a porn star have to do with Russian collusion?
Absolutely nothing.
What?
Absolutely
That's
nothing.
what I thought. That's what I thought. I mean, they're talking about all of this. And since when was paying off a porn star more important than Hillary's Uranium One deal or selling off 20% of our strategic uranium? Since when is that more important?
Well, because the deep state loves Hillary Clinton, or at least they're afraid of her, and they want Donald Trump out any way that they can. There's something about Trump they're obviously terrified of. And Trump needs to figure out what that is and start using it for leverage, because Trump is giving them almost everything that they want. I mean, he's not opening up. He hasn't really closed the borders either. He's giving them all the wars they want, and so I think they hate him because of the possibility that if he were to wake up and realize just how bad things are, that he's going to start calling for his own special counsels. This is all about protecting the scandals. And if the Democrats steal the House in November, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to shut down all these investigations into the Department of Justice and FBI and Hillary's server, the Clinton Foundation. They're all going to go away. And they'll just start piling more and more investigations on Trump until they get him either impeached or they get him to resign. And I've never seen American politics this dirty. Of course, we all know politics is a dirty business, always has been. But I've never seen it this dirty and this open for public scrutiny.
You're right. I mean, a part of me feels like why they want him out so bad is because yes, we can all agree that there's some corruption there with Trump, absolutely. But I believe this in my heart, that he's not an insider. He's not part of the good old boys club. Yes. And I think, that's a lot of it. I think that is a lot of it. And a lot of it, too, is, look at what he had to pick with, inside of D.C. Everybody inside of the Beltway is dirty with either with kids or with narcotics. I mean, honestly, I believe that's what runs D.C., pedophilia and drugs.
And money.
I mean, I wish there was something that... and dirty money. I mean, I would love, I know this sounds bad, but I wish we went back to the days of bartering. I wish this federal government, the corrupt part of the federal government, crashing down, and we rebuild it back up. It needs to happen. It really does.
I think it is going to happen. I think it is going to happen. I see a Soviet Union-style collapse as the future of the U.S. federal government, and we all have to be prepared to deal with that, which means effectively being off the grid, not dependent on the corporate supply chain, and ready to basically take care of ourselves for 3 to 4 months and start to put together a new country that does not include a government that does not include, rather, anybody who's currently in government. We have to get these corrupt people out.
Totally.
You know, or we may let luck out. They may just take their ill-gotten gains and get out of the country as it's all coming down. Head off down to the Caymans and just kick back and retire.
I think Trump gave them a chance, didn't he, at the beginning, saying, just take your stuff that you got, your ill-gotten gains, and just leave. I mean, but I feel like they're putting up this fight because they want him out. In the end, I do believe we the people might get some justice out of this. Maybe. I'm still holding on to that hope.
I would like to see that, but I've been at this for almost a quarter of a century now, waiting to see some kind of justice for the real big criminals in D.C., and it doesn't seem to be happening here. And as for Trump saying, take your goodies and get out, the reason they didn't get out is they're money junkies. It doesn't matter how much they have. It's never enough. They can't be happy. They're only happy when they're getting more. And if they retire, then they're not getting more. They have to just sit there with however many millions that they've got and, you know, play bingo or shuffleboard or whatever it is, and they're going to be absolutely miserable.
And you can't buy happiness, you know, with money. I mean,
yeah, but you can be miserable in comfort.
Ain't that some truth? Well, I hope you and Miss Claire hunker down and be safe. Love you guys to death, and have a great show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are now open. Jim Rickards is sounding a warning that we might actually be closer to a shooting war with China than most people think. Now, we've been hearing out of U.S. government spokespeople that China is a bigger threat to the United States than Russia. They're not really clear why this is so, and we do know that the United States is concerned about projecting power into the western part of the Pacific. And China is definitely building their military and exerting their territorial prerogatives, especially in those islands in the South China Sea. Now, one thing that I keep seeing in the corporate media over and over again is how China just built these islands. That's not accurate. Those islands were always there. China is building them up. It's expanding them. It's improving them. But those islands have always been there, and they were part of China before World War II. And then Japan invaded them. And then at the end of World War II, as part of the Cairo Convention, all of the allies on the winning side of World War II agreed those islands would go back to China. So Jim Rickard is looking at what China is doing in response to the tariffs and saying that their options back on Donald Trump are rather limited because China doesn't buy a lot of stuff from the United States. China's concerns over the tariffs are strictly about its exports. And Rickards is saying China could actually be pushed into a shooting war, whether it's over those islands. Certainly wouldn't want it to be here. But I think the U.S. government needs to recognize that its continued belligerence against the rest of the world is creating a lot of hostility. It's isolating the United States, and at some point, somebody's going to say, well, we know it's coming anyway, let's start it today, and they're going to push a button. Over in Moscow, a man apparently opened fire at 2 police officers standing outside the Cambodian embassy in central Moscow. He injured one of the police officers. The shooter himself was shot by return fire. Apparently he's in critical condition. And because he can't talk, they don't know why. This guy did it. He just was walking by and he took out a gun. and opened fire. Now, getting on back to America's weaponry, we're going to pick on my favorite boondoggle, the F-35. Apparently, over at Eglin Air Force Base, an F-35 was forced to make an emergency landing for an unstated in-flight emergency. They're not saying what happened to the plane, but the pilot brought it in for a landing and landed successfully up until the moment the nose gear collapsed and pitched the aircraft forward onto its nose. Pilot's unhurt, but heaven only knows how much it's going to cost to repair that. So now we have to ask, is the landing gear weak on the aircraft? Remember, it's actually a lot heavier than it was originally supposed to be because of all the stuff that's been added to it. Larger engine to try and improve its performance. All these electronic things. All right, let's turn to the domestic politics because a lot is going on there. Now, Donald Trump is out there saying that Michael Cohen lied to cut a deal. And Trump has been comparing Cohen to Paul Manafort, saying that, Manafort got just absolutely brutally beat up by the Department of Justice over this 12-year-old tax case, which is weird. I thought there was a 5-year statute of limitations on tax cases. Anyway, they put tremendous pressure on him, and he refused to break. He refused to turn on Trump and make up stories about him. Cohen did. And we know that getting people to lie to get Trump is part of what they like to do. Remember, Lisa Bloom was caught offering women up to $750,000 to accuse Trump of sexual assault leading up to the election. That didn't get a lot of coverage in the corporate media. It was covered in the independent media, probably another reason the corporate media doesn't like us very much. But Donald Trump on Fox and Friends basically said the payments didn't come out of campaign financing. And remember, according to that story that was over at 12160, the actual government indictment says that Trump called off this deal that Cohen had proposed. Cohen is still out there all over the media right now saying, oh yes, Trump told me to do it. It's all his fault. Trump made me do it. Well, if you know it's illegal, Cohen, you're not obligated to do what then candidate Trump tells you to do. We're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, Judicial Watch is suing the Department of Justice for records about the raid on Michael Cohen's office, home, and hotel room. Apparently, there is a question of whether these raids were legal, justified, whether there were actually warrants, whether they were valid. And so Judicial Watch, as usual, has filed Freedom of Information Act requests, gets turned down, and has to follow up with a lawsuit. And it's just another way of delaying the process because the courts always grant Judicial Watch, access to the documents. And then the Department of Justice will say, well, we'll get them over there sometime soon. You're not in a rush, really. You're not in a rush. We'll get them over there eventually here. Okay. Now, but there's no question. They railroaded the guy. Knowing that everybody in Washington, D.C. is guilty of something makes it easy. Go after them, find what they're guilty of, threaten to put them in jail unless they do what you tell them to do. And that's exactly what Michael Cohen did. By the way, Cohen's lawyer, Lanny Davis, is a registered foreign agent for a pro-Russian oligarch that is wanted by the United States government, Dmitry Firtash. He's a Ukrainian oligarch, and, well, there's your Russian collusion right there. By the way, apparently, Lanny Davis went on TV asking for money for like a GoFundMe, and apparently the TV audience laughed at him here. A lot of people are out there saying, will Trump pardon Manafort? Personally, I think He should. This is such an obvious political hatchet job here. And of course, everybody's saying, "Oh, that would look bad. That would look bad. That would be very questionable. That Mueller would just look at that." But look at all the other questionable people who've been pardoned by previous presidents. We had, Bill Clinton pardoned Mark Rich just before he left the White House here, and we had, let's see, was. Apparently, basically Clinton issued 396 pardons during his tenure, 140 of which were issued on his last day in office. And one of his most high-profile last-minute pardons was even investigated by, drumroll please, James Comey, who found there was no wrongdoing on Bill Clinton's part. So Clinton pardoned Congressman Dan Rostenkowski after serving 13 months of a 17-month sentence for embezzlement. Then there was Mel Reynolds, was pardoned by Clinton after being convicted of bank fraud, 12 counts of sexual assault of a child, obstruction of justice, and solicitation of child pornography. All right, we got to take a break here for station identification. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, obviously, these convictions or guilty pleas from Cohen and Manafort have really emboldened Trump opponents. They've lit up. Oh, hallelujah, 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 and so forth. But as so many people have already pointed out, this has got nothing to do with Trump's possible collusion with Russia. Mueller has basically gone so far outside of his original mandate, and it really is a joke. That's what Rod Rosenstein supposedly set Mueller up to do. Look into the issue of Russian collusion. And he hasn't found it. So now they're trying to just find something, anything they can use to try and put pressure on President Trump. And it is a witch hunt. It's an absolute witch hunt here. Now, Mark Penn, who was the former pollster for both Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, has written an op-ed in The Hill yesterday, in which he argues Michael Cohen's guilty plea shows the double standard prosecutors have applied unfairly to Donald Trump. Penn argues that while what Trump is alleged to have done, paying Stormy Daniels for a non-disclosure agreement she had sought for 5 years prior to the election, was legal, Hillary Clinton failed to report campaign expenditures that led to the Steele dossier. And Penn is arguing if anyone broke campaign finance law, it was Clinton, not Trump. But the prosecutors are after Trump. They want him out of office. It's like I said before, politics is dirty. We know that. But I've never seen it this dirty or this visible, this open. Now, over at courtesy of the Investment Watch blog, we now know for a fact that, yes, Hillary Clinton still has her national security clearance. And I notice that her name is not on the list of people Trump is considering yanking security clearances from. And I have to ask why. Because if we take former FBI Director James Comey at his word, that Hillary didn't mean to do wrong, he still described her as extremely careless with classified material. Now, I understand that there was an issue where Hillary Clinton insisted she needed to keep her security clearance while she was writing books about her time at the State Department. That doesn't really make sense, because anything that requires a security clearance, she can't put in the book. It's all about spying on the government, keeping tabs on things, or selling this stuff off to foreign governments. Ann Coulter, I don't always agree with her, especially when she says things like a little radiation is good for you. But she's written an article called The Pantsuit That Cried Wolf, in which she basically lays it out that this whole Russia conspiracy is classic Hillary. And that Hillary was the one who first came up with this idea that it's going to be Russian collusion, that the Russians are evil. And Ann Coulter says part of the problem is that Hillary Clinton cannot accept her own failures. There always has to be somebody to blame. We certainly saw that in the aftermath of the 2016 election. Everybody was getting blamed for it. Even the corporate media got blamed for it. The independent media certainly got blamed for it. Then women who betrayed other women and voted for Trump were blamed. She was blaming everybody. Blamed John Podesta. Apparently physically attacked him at least one point. So Hillary can't accept that maybe people didn't like her. There had to be a villain. And Russia's a great villain. So that's where it came from. Hillary's always blamed her troubles on bad people conspiring against her. Remember the vast right-wing conspiracy? That was classic Hillary. So Coulter is right. She's got it bang on here. Let me get her book. All righty. Now back over at the Department of Justice, Jeff Sessions has let off another deep state crook. Apparently, the Department of Justice is declining to prosecute a corrupt FBI agent who took gifts and money from a confidential human source, which is Bureau speak for an informant. The FBI agent also protected the source's illegal business and misused the FBI assets for personal gain. And Jeff Sessions said, nah, not a big deal. He didn't mean to do wrong. We're going to let him go here. Lindsey Graham, meanwhile, is saying that Donald Trump is very likely to fire Jeff Sessions following November's midterm elections. Now, that is going to raise an interesting problem because it means that Trump is only going to have literally a month to get a new attorney general approved by a GOP Congress. Because if the Democrats do take control of the House, they will obstruct everything Trump tries to do. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network here. Yesterday we were talking about how the Obama campaign got fined for various violations back in 2008. And apparently the Biden for President campaign committee owes the Treasury more than $219,000 because it accepted excessive campaign contributions and understated the value of a trip taken on a private plane in the 2008 campaign. And Biden's press secretary said that, yes, they're going to pay the amount owed. So they're all cheating. They're all bending the rules. They're all cutting corners. This story worries me. It's out of bigleaguepolitics.com, and it's talking about this violent Antifa group is planning what they describe as a red army to, quote, annihilate conservatives, end quote. And this is coming out of Red Guards Austin, which is a self-proclaimed Marxist-Leninist, Maoist, violent Antifa group, has called for the formation of this army. And this group out of Austin, Texas, works in tandem with Red Guards Kansas City, Red Guards Pittsburgh, Red Guards Los Angeles, and Red Guards Charlotte to annihilate those they believe are collaborators or fascists. We're getting into a serious, serious situation where now the violence is getting really organized across the entire country here. Okay, just got another hurricane warning. Okay. I'll have to take care of that later. Now, turning to the economic news. Oh, we have a caller on the line. All right, let's take the call. Scott in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I had a nice little phone call with Cody after we hung up yesterday and addressed some of the points that y'all were asking about. And we did a video, a podcast on it on Real.video. And it's Snafu Radio and Cody Snodgrass address. I couldn't remember if it was a respond to Michael Rivero and what really happened, and lay out, because you were asking about why isn't he not dead, and all these kind of things. So we addressed some of those issues and talked about censorship. And, you know, y'all can have your point of view and sit around and snicker and laugh or make fun of or whatever, you know, like that Nathan dude did. But you don't have the right to censor people. And if you don't agree with them, you just knee-jerk reaction to shut them up and cut them off and and dismiss them outright. And if that's the way you want to run your show, I mean, it's no better than YouTube for censoring people.
Well,
so we addressed all.
There are some policies that we have here.
To get on it. Well, there's some policies that some what now?
Okay, when we have people calling into the show who are being abusive or who are trying to push an agenda that we already know is illegitimate, I do tend to be rather short with them. There's no question about it. And there are people that I'm not going to just let rant on and on and on, trying to use my show for their particular platform. They're free to open their own platform elsewhere. I try to be very polite and respectful with callers, but there are callers who are troublemakers. And again, it's my show, and I do have the authority, if you will, that troublemakers are going to get cut off because that's all they're here to do is troublemaking. And there are topics which are basic. There are topics which are not allowed.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. You know, I mean, if you want to just censor somebody when they bring something up, you know, instead of saying, yeah, okay, well, you know, I might look into that. No, you just totally dismiss them outright. I know how you do. I've listened to you when you used to do the same thing with John from Barbados. You know, I've listened to the show for a long time.
Well,
so,
wait a minute,
yeah, I mean,
Scott,
you can have whatever you want.
Scott, I never did that with John in Barbados. He was one of the show's best callers, and we all miss him. Okay. All right. Thank you for the call, Scott. I will look into it, and let's move on with the news here. All righty. Getting onto the economic news. Russia is planning to get around the U.S. sanctions by stockpiling more gold, and they have a lot. And basically, the Russian central bank's first deputy governor, Dmitry Tulin, said Moscow sees the acquisition of gold as a 100% guarantee from legal and political risks. In other words, they want to settle accounts in gold and not go through all this paper currency, electronic, whatever. And they're doing this in response to Washington threatening to impose new sanctions on Moscow until Moscow changes its behaviors. And along those lines, over in Switzerland, one of their largest banks, Credit Suisse, has suspended $5 billion in assets linked to Russia as a result of Washington's sanctions against Russia. And there's apparently fear among Western banks of reprisals from the United States for working with targeted Russian individuals and entities. Now, according to Reuters, the bank froze the funds in the second part of 2018. And Credit Suisse denies freezing the Russian assets. They simply reclassified them to comply with sanctions. They reclassified from assets under management to assets under custody, which sounds to me like freezing and grabbing the funds in politically correct speech here. Saudi Arabia had been considering a public stock offering for Aramco, which is the state oil producer and the world's most profitable company. And people were looking forward to the deal, but all of a sudden, looks like the IPO is being called off, and they want to keep the company private. I think somebody just started thinking, you know, an IPO would be great, look at all that money coming in, but then somebody else said, why does Aramco, the world's most profitable company, need an IPO? The only reason you go for an IPO is if you're in a period of growth. If you're already a big, large corporation and you got there privately, yes, it'll make the company worth more, and those who have equity in the company will become overnight millionaires. It's not always the smartest thing to do here. Up in Germany, we're seeing some straining at the leash here. Apparently, there was a statement written by the German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas on the authoritative Handelsblatt. This is a major statement as it carries weight just below the official German policy, which in turn has strong weight on EU policy. And basically, in short, he's saying we will not allow the U.S. to act at our expense. And I'm sure they're looking back at the first round of Russian sanctions, which led to embargoes by Russia. It caused a lot more harm to Europe than it did to Russia. So, this weaponizing of the global economy is not going to end well. And ultimately, ordinary people like you and I will be the ones who will be made to pay the price for it. Over in Turkey, their lira has plummeted again because of the standoff between the U.S. and Turkey. It's fallen a massive 37% so far this year, triggered by concerns about Erdogan's influence over monetary policy. Now, Bolton is out there saying that the U.S. intends to use sanctions to drive Iran's oil exports to zero. I personally don't think he's going to be able to succeed. There are too many other countries out there saying they're going to find ways around this. Trump could be hoisting with his petard on this one. This overuse of sanctions could trigger a reaction in the rest of the world to simply de-link away from involvement with the U.S. economy at all. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Dave in Missouri, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Howdy, Mike. Hope you're having a blessed day, brother. I am livid at the news that Hillary still has her security clearance. What kind of reality is this, where an obvious traitor, I mean, the Wicked Witch of the West, can still not only maintain all kinds of blackmail over the whole political establishment, so she skates on every treasonous crime under the sun, but then she also gets to keep her security clearance to continue to sell secrets away. I mean, which you know she's doing. I mean, she's made so much money just panhandling all of our national security secrets, caught red-handed. Sure, everybody's scared of her because she knows where the bodies are and how they died and who did it, mostly her and her people. But, you know, this is just a farce beyond farces, man. I mean, that news blew my mind. And, you know, I kind of figured, but I didn't know until you clarified it. And, man, I guess there's just no way to ever rid ourselves of that demonic witch. It blows my mind.
Well, you know, she's getting older, and as we saw in 2016, her health is not all that good. So time will solve that problem.
Well, that problem, but, you know, she's also groomed a whole next generation. You know, some of them have been caught, but how many of her prodigies are out there that we don't even know about until they have their turn at the switch? You know, the example that is set, that she gets to just blackmail her way through this life. Yep. and carry on. Yeah, I mean, that example is not lost on the next generation of traitors who are coming up in her wake. And so, you know, it blows my mind, man. I'm almost going to give up hope that anything will ever happen. And, you know, it was a false hope, I know. But I really did, I did think that with Trump's rhetoric and all of the evidence, that something was bound to sooner or later happen. Instead, we hear that Mueller is going to go after Don Jr. over, you know, some meeting that, you know, resulted in nothing. And, you know, did they know? You know, and so, you know, the whole thing is just so, pardon my language, ass backward. And I'm just, I don't want to give up on this country. I have a beautiful grandson. You know, but, man, we've lived under this, and I don't want him to have to live under this kind of corruption and just blatant treasonous tyranny. These people are tyrants, and they're able to skate because they blackmail their way through. And it just blows my mind that she still has access to all our national security secrets, so she can continue to sell them to the Chi-Coms or whoever wants to buy, and which she is doing, as I do. And it just, I'm just livid, Mike. I don't even have words for it, but I wanted to express that to your audience, because I know there's a lot of people out there that feel the same way. Do you think there is anything that we can do collectively as a citizenry to maybe push justice, or is it just out of the bag and gone?
Well, we have to take a commercial break here, and my answer is going to be rather long. So stay on the line, and I'm going to right back to you after these words from our sponsors. America, welcome back to our show here, and we're talking with Dave in Missouri. And Dave, the best thing that we can all do right now is to keep each other informed what's going on. Bring back the sneaker net. Talk to people face to face. Social media is trying to basically become just as filtered and controlling as corporate media, even though they have to see what that did to corporate media's profitability. But we have to keep our fellow citizens informed. As Thomas Jefferson said, the highest duty of any citizen is to keep themselves fully informed so they can make good choices. And we have to sort of remind our fellow Americans that, yeah, finding the truth is not easy. You want to be lied to, just sit on back and, they'll lie to you. They'll tell you things that make you feel good about yourself and feel good about the country and feel good about all the death and destruction here. But if you want to know the truth, you have to go out and dig it out. Think of yourself as an archaeologist. Think of yourself, as Indiana Jones while you do this, and that makes it fun.
I get that, but the sad part is such a large segment of our population does not want to know the truth. They've got their head in video games or whatever it is. And maybe, I can understand, because if you really get into the meat of all of this, it is extremely discouraging, and it really does upset a person if you care about the future of the country or even our present. It really does discourage you. Facebook has me shut down on 2 accounts. One account, I've been very careful not to post political stuff. The other one, I do. And they've got me shut down from both because they evidently drew the line and connected it. And so I am one of those. I know there's many who, I had pretty much decided to ditch Facebook anyway, because they've really become nothing but a communist outlet to just lord power over people. They don't produce anything. Yet their founder is one of the richest guys in the world. How does that happen? Selling our information to corporations. And so, and the stock, that whole thing has got to be a bubble, because there's no real value in the company. It could be MySpace tomorrow, and I believe it probably will be if they continue to act like this. They're not lord over anybody, but they're sure acting like it. And so the more they censor people for trying to stand up and do what they believe is right, speak the truth to power, speak the truth to their neighbors and friends, try to inform the citizenry, as you said, and they stomp on you, the more that happens, the more people are going to turn away from them. And I really would challenge everybody to consider ditching Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all that garbage that is sitting on top of people and denying people's free speech. They are not, they're not the end-all and be-all. Competition can come and needs to come. And so I don't know if we need to find another outlet. A program like yours could promote a conservative outlet for social, because I do believe social media has an important place in that it can connect people who are like-minded, help you share ideas, help you grow and learn. Just what you do on the radio. Social media has a place, but not this controlled communistic death to free speech kind of thing that we're seeing. That is on its way. That's a dinosaur dying. And so I really believe they've shot themselves in both feet.
There's all these new social media startups, these replacements for YouTube, replacements for Twitter. Kim.com is working on one of those. And there's going to be a shakeout where we see which ones survive and which ones don't, and a couple of them have already shut down. But they are doing very well. People are signing up because people want the truth, and they want the right to speak their mind without any kind of a consequence. And Facebook and Instagram will probably continue because right now they are the golden throne of America's self-absorption. If you look at a lot of what's on Facebook and Instagram, it's all about, ooh, a picture of me in front of this and a picture of me in front of that. I think selfie sticks are a really serious symptom of how our society has become extremely vain. And we certainly don't have any justification for it.
You know, we're a nation full of narcissists who, you know, run around with our head in the sand, ignoring reality and tuning in to just whatever, I guess, tickles us or whatever. But anything that's real is like people are allergic to. And so, I mean, and I see that just trying to speak to people. I mean, they just glass over. They don't want to hear it. And, you know, it's like if it's not an election year, then they're tuned out of reality and, you know, and carry on with their, and I get it. Everybody's worked to death. You know, we haven't had really a raise in income, wages in, 20 years now? And so, you know, people are working harder for less than ever.
Yes.
The cost of everything has blown up. So, you know, I mean,
we're working hard to support that war economy.
Yeah, the day-to-day reality has exhausted people so that they just don't mentally have the ability or the stamina, strength to tune in. And I get it. It's so discouraging. But if we don't, man, you know, we just continue to surrender to people like Hillary Clinton who skate. And it blows my mind, man. I mean, I'm thinking about Honduras, and I'm not sure where to go.
I don't blame you. I wouldn't come to Hawaii right at this particular minute. Anyway, Dave, got to let you go. Got to take another break for commercials. Back with more phone calls after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to take some phone calls. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, I hope you got that 3-second delay on because, Scott, don't bring John from Barbados up like that no more because he was our friend, right, Mike? I mean,
yes.
Remember when his daughter called and says he passed away?
Yeah.
Mike, you know how much that hurt me? I mean, he was a good guy, you know? And you get this guy, Scott. When's the last time you called in, Scott? It's August 23rd today, right?
Yes.
You know, where the hell were you, Scott? You know? John from Barbados gave us a lot of great information. He might not be wrong, you know, right all the time, but he was a good guy. I call in just as much as John from Barbados. But I mean, this dude, Scott, either coming from Washington, D.C. or Langley, Virginia, Mike, or some front because...
I actually got an email. I actually got an email saying that Scott must think there's a 2-drink minimum demanded prior to calling into our show.
Yeah, I mean, John from Barbados was a great guy. I mean,
yes.
Then he brings him up like you cut him off or this or that. Bull, man. You know, Mike, I'm aggravated, Mike, because, you know, I mean, come on now. What kind of creepos are calling in? Just like that other guy about Alex Jones. Well, you know, if you don't like it, don't listen or watch it. You know, this kind of crap pisses me off, Mike.
Well,
it really does.
Yeah,
you know?
Again, we're getting a lot of shill callers who are trying to disrupt the show and take it off topic, waste our time, and so forth. And it's just another way, it's another part of the attack on the independent media. Anything else, Dustin?
No, Mike, I just want to say, you know, this is the kind of people we're dealing with. John Barbados passed away. You know, we all love John from Barbados, but don't bring him up like that. You know, screw you, Scott, okay? Thanks, Mike. Bye.
All right, you're welcome here. And considering how long it has been since John from Barbados was with us, it almost feels like Scott just picked the name out of the air. You know, because it has been a while since John passed away. All right, back to the phones here. Francis in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha to you both. And I really wasn't looking to call in, believe me. There's a couple points. One was about the security of the various politicians and so forth. But first, I have to address another side issue that got brought to my attention. I know Dave means well, bless him, but I think people need to get their terminology straight before using it, i.e., calling a politician a wicked witch. For one thing, no witch that I'm aware of would even claim her as such to begin with, because I've met witches. They're not wicked. The ones I have met and come in contact with are vegetarian. They abhor the aspect of bloodshedding and so forth. And, you know, the terminology can go on and on and on as far as my expression or definition goes of the people I've met that are legitimately a witch. So calling her that is really abhorrent and an insult. A lot of people find that to be troubling or whatever. That's fine. That said, the aspect of people getting upset about, well, I can appreciate why, that Hillary's security clearance has not been revoked and so forth. But you know what? How many other politicians' security clearance have not been revoked for that matter? There are a number of them. After all, if they're part of the District of Criminals circuit, as a lot of them are, otherwise they wouldn't be there, then believe me, they have access to that same material for that matter. And this whole cursory revocation of their security clearance in reality in this day and time, since the year 2000 or since 9/11, is a complete joke. Sadly to say, it's a complete joke. It's especially with all the various what I call alphabet soup agencies out there that are supposedly minding what's going on to whom and from where and whatever have you, is also behind that whole facade of a security clearance being revoked for that matter. Now, with that being said, I hate to drag this other part into it, but since there seems to be an issue about that you even addressed about ransom notices on as far as the internet goes and ransomware or whatever have you, well, let me put it this way. If the NSA, FBI, whatever agency you want to call it, or alphabet soup you want to call it, since they seem to be unable to handle it or clear it up, then it's suffice to say that they're behind it. Otherwise, that would have been cleared up a long time ago. After all, it is just electronic keystrokes on a computer, of all things. I mean, it's electrons. It's someone getting behind a computer screen and typing up a note and sending it who knows where, just to see what they can claim, for that matter. And they are basically pros at this stuff. Not that some of the various computer companies out there like Microsoft and who knows what, and Apple and who knows what isn't behind or allowing a lot of this to happen on their systems, so they're getting a big-time killing over it. So with that, I'll let you have fun with it. Your thoughts?
Well,
meanwhile, I'm out of here.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Now, a while back, Kaspersky said that there was at least one hacker collective called the Equation Group that Kaspersky traced basically to the NSA. And the NSA's job, of course, is to monitor everything. They, if nobody else, should know where the ransomware writers are and what they're doing. But they don't. Or they claim they don't, or they claim it's not really their job. Their job is looking for terrorists, and they haven't found too many of those either. So it's another government program, you know, a lot of money and not really doing all that much that's worth anything to the American people. But a big part of the problem are all the back doors which have been put into our software and hardware going back almost to the very beginning of the personal computer revolution. Remember when they discovered the NSA key in, I think it was Windows NT? All the way back to there, they were putting in these back doors. The problem is that sooner or later, these back doors are discovered or leaked out. I'm sure it can be very lucrative for somebody to basically sell the secret of these back doors to cyber criminals. Because cybercrime, it's not just some kid sitting in a basement somewhere anymore, you know, with a script kiddie. It's become very highly organized. It's another form of organized crime. And no, the government isn't really doing anything about it at all. Alrighty, so phone lines are empty. Let's get on back to the news here. Apparently, the U.S. State Department is now saying that any country purchasing Russia's S-400 missile faces possible U.S. sanctions. This was mentioned by Heather Nauert, the State Department spokesperson. during a briefing, saying that Washington was against a possible purchase of Russian S-400 air defense systems by its allies around the world. Well, you're not going to have many allies left if you treat them like that. So, I can't speak for all these other countries on Earth, but I'm very annoyed at this heavy-handed approach by the United States. And I understand what the goal is. You know, Russia makes money off the S-400 the way the U.S. makes money off the weapons that it sells. This is another way to dink Russia. And, of course, to pour more money into the U.S. military-industrial complex. But a proper way to deal with this issue would be to have a U.S.-manufactured missile that's just as good as the S-400 and costs a little bit less. That's what would work. Instead of all this threats, and arm twisting, and bullying, thug-like behavior. That's exactly what it is. China has filed a complaint to the World Trade Organization against the U.S. tariffs, and under what they call Section 301. So we'll see what happens over there. I can imagine the rest of the world is getting pretty sick and tired of the behavior of the United States government. Down in South Africa, current estimates are a white farmer is killed every 5 days, and the authorities are doing nothing about it. And it is terrible to see South Africa go this direction from, you know, the good start it had when apartheid ended and the African National Congress, you know, formed itself, and they had Nelson Mandela, who was all about building South Africa up, and now we're in this situation where they're going to go right down the tubes like Zimbabwe did. Story out of the Washington Times is saying South Africa is risking economic destruction in seizing white-owned farms, according to analysts. And a lot of people are saying this is basically communistic. So they're basically going back to before Nelson Mandela and saying what happened to us all the way back then now justifies what we're doing to you. And we hear a lot of that rhetoric here in the United States, where people like Antifa are out there, you know, or I'm sorry, Black Lives Matter are out there saying, well, you know, there used to be slaves in this country. Yeah, back in the 1800s. Doesn't matter. We have a right to take your wealth because we were all slaves. Actually, most black people weren't slaves. And very few white people were slave owners. In the antebellum South, only 4% of the white people owned slaves. A lot of blacks owned other slaves. So, over in London, there is a charity, if you will, near Charing Cross Station. And every day you see this line formed of people waiting for their dinner. Now, some are clearly homeless, carrying their bags with all their worldly possessions. Others wear work clothes. They have a job. And even though they have a job, they can't afford to eat. So they have to go to this charity, and food packages are handed out. Now, we're starting to see that here in the United States, where even people with jobs can't afford to eat or even find a place to live. Remember that story a while back? This person working for Google, because of the high rents in Silicon Valley, was working at Google and living out of her car. That's really unacceptable. For one thing, you're not going to get good job performance out of workers who are suffering that hard. Today in America, 52.1% of children under the age of 18 live in households that are getting means-tested government assistance. It's the same thing. Households where people are working and working hard, and they still don't have enough money to feed their children. as I mentioned to that caller earlier, we're all being worked to death to support that war economy, because that's what we've been living in for the last 17 years, a wartime economy. If you know anybody who's old enough to remember World War II, who was a civilian, didn't serve in combat, just ask them what day-to-day life was like, and they'll tell you there was ration cards, there were metal drives. Literally, they'd come around with trucks and say, any metal that you can spare, old pots, old pans. So, apparently down in Venezuela, their attempt to switch over to a new currency is not working out so well. They're trying to link this currency, the sovereign bolivar, to the petro, which is an oil-backed cryptocurrency, which, by the way, is now banned by the U.S. Treasury. So apparently, people are going to the ATMs, and there's a daily limit. They're allowed to take out 10 sovereign bolivars a day. That's roughly equivalent to 15 U.S. cents. So good idea, bad implementation, and it doesn't look like Venezuela has a plan to deal with the crisis. Now, the other day I was talking about how dismissive the corporate media has become of the Molly Tibbetts case now that it turned out she was murdered by an illegal immigrant. Now, remember when she first disappeared, this was headline news. They were using this to not have to report on other things. It was Molly Tibbetts all day long, every day. Oh, it was, you know. And then they finally found her, and they found the killer. It's an illegal immigrant. You know, it was, of course, seized on by people who want secure borders. And so the corporate media basically just dropped it. It was that lady at MSNBC that just said, oh, she's some girl in Iowa that Fox News is talking about. They're letting it fall by the wayside because it doesn't fit the narrative that open borders are a good thing and illegal immigration should be allowed to continue. By the way, Molly Tibbetts' killer has already been arraigned, been granted $5 million bail. Something tells me he doesn't have that. But again, this is the true cost of illegal immigration. We're bringing people into this country who are a threat to American citizens. There was that other commentator that was out there saying, well, it's okay to bring illegal immigrants in who might kill Americans because white people kill other white people too. I mean, it's all equal here. Over in Sweden, which is now the rape capital of the world, they've now discovered that 58% of all the convicted rapists are from a foreign country. And the same was true for 85% of what are called assault rapists. So how's that globalism thing working out for you here? Oh, I missed this when I was talking about the economics here. Apparently, Orchard Supply Hardware, which is owned by Lowe's, is having to shut down. Its 98 stores in California, Oregon, and Florida will be closed, along with its distribution center in Tracy, California. And its 4,000 employees will be let go. Liquidation sales started today. Okay, we're coming up here on another commercial break. We've got another caller waiting on the line. And we'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. So stay tuned. I'm going to go take a look at the weather. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Let's go to the phone lines now, starting with Bob in New Jersey. Aloha, Bob. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Okay, Mike, the Utah data center. We're talking zettabytes of information. It's all being stored, and it seems like a Fourth Amendment violation. But
yes,
I'm thinking maybe it could be a gold mine for anthropologists in the future generations. You know, can you imagine what your grandma, your great grandpa said and blogged, and you know what I'm saying? I think this could be a cash cow, but it needs to be sealed, not dumped. The data.
Well,
for protection.
let's go back to your first point. Yes, this is a Fourth Amendment violation, and
Right.
it's a huge expense, and they're using it to keep
Well,
watch on
yeah,
all of us.
It's over $1
hasn't
billion, very much.
It actually hasn't caught any terrorists or thwarted any terrorists.
No, I know. I'm thinking archaeology. I'm talking, maybe future generations might want to study us and see where we screwed up.
Well, that's certainly a worthy topic there. That ought to get you tenure. The problem is in future generations, the technology will have changed. I mean, I'm sitting here with all of this computer gear. The stuff that I used when I first got into personal computers, the media doesn't work anymore. Magnetic media is only good for about 5 years. Now we're discovering that CD-ROMs, CDRs you make yourself, they're only good for about 5 years. In fact, CDs are already going the way of the dodo bird in favor of USB drives. And
yes, but it's a needle in the haystack. I mean, unless you're interested in say a relative, a distant relative. I mean, nobody. I mean, it's all information overload. Otherwise,
well,
right?
Yeah, it would have to be indexed properly. I don't know that. I think the whole thing should be shut down and all the disks formatted, and everybody who violated the Fourth Amendment should go to jail. We're not going to see that happen. The only saving grace, of course, is they're collecting so much information they can't make sense of it.
Right.
And anybody who understands
right.
to
find a needle in the haystack, just throw some more hay on it. Right.
Yeah, that was exactly what they did wrong. Instead of starting out saying we have grounds to suspect this person of engaging in a criminal activity and focusing on them, they just said, we're just going to grab everybody's communication and then we'll be instantly able to just zoom in on the bad people, just like in the movies. Because you see this kind of stuff like in the Bourne Legacy. I need information on this and such. Whoop, there it is. It's up on the screen. Not really going to happen, not with that much data.
Well, the point is, we're paying for it, and it cannot be used. The Fourth Amendment, it cannot be used against us, but future generations may want to love looking into it,
Well,
right?
I wouldn't bet that this government is not going to use that information against citizens. Fourth Amendment be gosh darn.
Correct.
Anyway,
Correct.
I got to let you go. We got to take a break for station identification.
Okay.
We'll be back with another phone call after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And we're going to take one quick phone call, and then we're going to get to our third hour guest, Don Wiskin. So let's see. Glenn in Philadelphia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Hi. Mike, alphabet soup is an American classic that is wholesome, nutritious, and encouraging of literacy. And it really burns my lexicon when these callers insist on deprecating alphabet soup by associating it with corrupt government agencies that are known by 3-letter acronyms. It's just not right.
Okay, your point is taken.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
All right, thanks an awful lot. And now joining us on the line is Don Wiskin, who is, of course, the force behind the project Extendivite. And Don, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Michael.
And anything new from the world of Extendivite? Any new developments? Any new markets opening up?
I would have to say no. We're still doing the same old, same old thing.
All right. Well, let's talk about the product then here. Yep. The reason why Claire and I are involved, we take this product and we love having Extendivite as a sponsor, and it has to do with the growing concern among the public about just what it is we are being fed by the drugstores. And I sometimes wish that people would wake up and really pay attention to those glitzy TV commercials that we see for a particular prescription medication, and there's always that rapid voice at the very end saying, if you take this medication, some bad things might happen, you might actually die, and these people then run off to their doctors and say, oh, I saw this on TV and I want that. And the doctor will say, oh, all right, here's your note. go get your drugs from the drugstore here. And because of this tendency to create synthetic molecules that can be patented, you don't always know what's going to happen with these medications, as opposed to medications that you get from nature, which have been around sharing the planet with human beings for a very, very long time. And we know they're safe because we've been taking them for a very long time, which gets us here to extendivite, which is made up, well, Don, you tell them what's in it.
Sure. There's garlic, cayenne, bilberry, hawthorn, ginkgo biloba, valerian, and milk thistle. And all 7 of these herbs together synergistically go about cleaning out the arteries and giving you back your health. But it also does a lot more than that, because it helps to boost your natural immune system and just make you feel good. I mean, the average person spends the last 10 years of their life in poor health, and some believe that's the way they're supposed to feel, because we have nothing to compare it to, because we gradually started feeling worse. So, when you start taking extendivite, within a few months, you start noticing a little more energy, a little more desire to get up and do something, and you feel good. These are things that people that don't think there's anything wrong with them are reporting after taking extendivite just for a few months.
Well, it certainly helped me, especially when I was going through my my weight loss regime, as it were.
Yeah, and that's pretty important. I mean, today with all of the fillers that they have in our food, well, a guy called in and was talking about alphabet soup, but alphabet soup is so high in salt that somebody might wind up with high blood pressure from eating way too much salt. But there is over 5 pounds of food additives eaten by the average American per year. So just imagine you're eating foods with all kinds of additives that really have no health benefits, but could also, lead to chronic health. I mean, over 50% of our population has some form of chronic ailment. Yes. And we're supposed to be, wealthier than we ever were in our past. Why are we so sick?
Well, that's a very, very good question. I mean, we have the most expensive medical care on earth, and it's something like 39th in quality. And a big part of the problem, though, is that we have toxified our own society. There's the additives in food. There are questionable chemicals in our medications. We're seeing a lot of illnesses which appear to be caused by some of this exposure. But the corporate media is not going to say anything bad about corporations putting bad stuff in their products, because then business goes down, the advertising goes away.
That's right, and some of the largest polluters are industrial farming and processing of our food. I mean, we're eating meat that is fed things other than just grass, whereas a grass-fed beef is good for you, but the meat you get off the shelf in the grocery store might not be as good as you think it is due to what they fed it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially when you look at how much livestock are being fed GMO corns, and in fact, that's a major market for it. And everybody says, well, those altered genes in the corn can't really hurt you, especially if you cook it, and they're correct about that. The real issue, though, is protein malformation during the protein expression process, which is how the altered DNA produces the change in the plant that is desired by its engineers. But as we saw with GMO corn, there can be unexpected side effects, which nobody's looking for, nobody's checking for any of this stuff. And it's rather terrible to be living in a country where the government turns such a blind eye to less than wonderful products. I mean, the FDA doesn't do any more of its own testing. They simply rely on the word of these corporations producing foods and medicines. And we find very often that their reports, their studies are flawed. There was a story that came out, I think about a month ago, about how basically half of the articles published in so-called, prestigious journals couldn't be replicated. And of course, repeatability is the essence of all science. But these articles are all put there so that some product manufacturer can say, oh, this is a good thing and we have it, we're going to sell it to you. And it's a very cynical way to live. And a lot of people are really starting to get very, very cautious about what they eat. I mean, we have an article later on in our talking points about how they're starting to find glyphosate in places you wouldn't expect to see it. It's ubiquitous, it's everywhere. And as you probably heard, there was a major lawsuit involving glyphosate that involved Monsanto getting hit with something like $280 million settlement over the fact that glyphosate does cause non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And this is triggering other lawsuits as well. And yet Roundup has been allowed to sell this chemical for years and years and years, even though studies done in other countries indicated there was a problem.
And a lot of countries don't want to buy our GMO food because of that fact. They're now finding that the glyphosates are in children's cereal too. So I think there's many more lawsuits coming. People are starting to wake up. Some people are starting to wake up to the reality of what is going on. And, they're starting to realize that when it comes to food, if nature made it, you can eat it. But if man made it, leave it alone.
Yeah, be very,
because you don't want to wind up eating that.
I always read the ingredients list on everything that I buy, and my rule of thumb is if I can't pronounce this, I'm not putting it in my mouth. And one of the cereal companies has already been hit with a major lawsuit over the fact that their cereal was just filled with this glyphosate. So I hope that some movement is made on this thing. We have an email question that says, how did you come up with the extendovite formula? Because you obviously were not taking it when you had your heart attacks. So that's a good question. How did you come up with this?
Well, I didn't. There's an older guy in Alberta who came up with this plan or up with this formula, and he'd had it for quite a while. He had quite a few things. He also had something for cancer, which unfortunately Health Canada stopped him from manufacturing. Last year he got into some trouble, and Health Canada didn't like the what was it? It'll come to me in a second. Swedish bitters. He was making Swedish bitters, and they didn't like it because he was making it with an alcohol solution, and they didn't like his cancer product that he had as well, and he was making this. Well, he had been making this for many, many years, and when I first started taking it, I went to see him because I was, so impressed that I wanted to, share with him my own experiences, and that's when we started doing business together. And as time went on, we just kept going. And then in 2003, I had a chat with some people about turning it into capsules. And we were able to make the capsules, which is fantastic because we have, that's our biggest seller. Most people take the capsules. They don't care for the liquid. But, over the years, we just kept doing it. And then in 2013, December 1st of 2013 in Canada, we needed to have an NPN number, which is a natural product number. It's kind of like a DIN, but it's for the herbal business. And it allows me to say that I can help maintain cardiovascular health and lower blood lipid levels in adults. So it allows me to make claims that our product has some benefits. There was a lot of money involved in getting that license in 2013, and Gabriel, the man who made this stuff, said to me, he says, you get the license, I'm old. So I said, okay. So I went after the license and got our license so that we could continue to produce this product. And when he retired last year, it was like, well, it's yours. You got all the licenses. So, and I did have a hand in making the capsules. So, I pretty well earned the right to keep this. And I'm one of the few voices that's out there that really promotes the heart drop industry. I'm not alone. There are other heart drops out there. This stuff works. I mean, once you get something good, people duplicate it like crazy. So It's out there. Other people have it. But I like to think I'm the largest voice who's, trying to get it off the ground. I've been doing this for 18 years now.
Well, let me ask you another question. Obviously, this is good for issues around the heart and the arteries and everything. Just out of random here, I mean, have there been any studies about the impacts of Extendivite on, for example, cholesterol levels?
We've had no clinical studies. Nobody has actually done the studies on it, but they've done studies on the hawthorn. They've done studies on garlic. All these things have been studied over the years. That's how we managed to get an NPN here in Canada, because they have so much medical information on these herbs that they just take the herbs individually and say, okay, if that's what you've got, that's good for that. But on an antidotal side, where people have been taking the product, it's amazing the testimonials we'll get, and you can read them on Amazon.com, Amazon.ca, HeartDrop.com. These are from people who've taken the product themselves and had major improvements. We also hear some of the commercials on RBN, which talk about, from the individuals themselves, what it's done for them. In my case, and this is how I got involved, I had a heart attack and lost 35% of my heart to damaged tissue, had a 95% blockage in one artery and over 75% in the rest. And a year later, well, basically a year and a couple of months later, after taking this for 7 months, I had a strange pain in my chest, and I went to my doctor. My medical records are amongst, on heartdrop.com, amongst the testimonials. And my doctors could not believe that this totally rebuilt. The pain I was having was blood and oxygen back in my dead heart tissue. My 95% blockage was gone. So were the 75% blockages. I had no blockages. They took me off all my medication and said, here's your medical records, because no one's ever going to believe you ever had a heart attack.
Okay. All righty. Well, let's see. I'm trying to find another question, because we have talked about this so many times.
Well, actually, Mike, you were saying earlier about the drugs on TV and how they're doing the advertising and people are running to their doctor. Sometimes you're on a $20 a month drug, you watch these ads on TV and you run to the doctor, and that's $100 a month. So, they're getting more money out of you to help cover their advertising cost.
Yes.
In England, half the people over 65 in England are on at least 5 different pills a day. And in 1990, that was only 12%, which today is over 47%.
Yeah, we have the same problem here in the United States. Once you're on that prescription medicine treadmill, you see households with like 12 different medications in the medicine cabinet. It's big business. It's drug pushing. And very often they're giving you one medicine to counter the side effects from an earlier medicine.
Yes.
It's good for their business. It's bad for the people. I was just looking right here on the front label of Extendivite, and it answers my question. Lowers cholesterol in adults.
Yes.
All right.
Yes. That's one of the claims that Health Canada allows us to make.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, and that's based on their history and their monograms on what these herbs are and what they can do, which took them quite a few years to put together. They started this whole routine in the year 2000, right around the same time I started, telling people about Extendivite.
Well, that must be a really nice resource to have. I'm not aware of anything like it here in the United States of America. Of course, here in the U.S., the big pharmaceutical companies and corporate media and even the government actively discourage people from having any kind of medication that they can make themselves or grow in their backyard. They're looking to schedule kratom now. And at one point, they wanted to ban even vitamins unless you got them by prescription, which I thought was rather absurd. Unfortunately, that went down in flames. At one point, they wanted to ban nanosilver or colloidal silver But there was a big hue and cry about that, and they re-legalized it, but only in a very weak, dilute solution.
Yeah, and they wanted to turn turmeric into a drug too, but the Indians said, no, hold on. That's our spice, that's our food. You're not taking that away.
Yeah.
Yeah, in 1961, the drug companies stopped all the studying of natural medicine in North America, and in 1963, they started writing textbooks that the doctors learned by.
Yes.
So it's really hard for us to get healthy when there's somebody looking after our medical field with an interest of their own, and not on getting people healthy, but getting people on their drugs to help them deal with the symptoms of whatever disease they've got that they could probably get rid of by changing their diet. And it is amazing what you can do just by changing your diet.
Well, I know a doctor who works at a very large hospital. I'm not going to identify the hospital or him, but one time he told me that the way the hospital evaluates their doctors is not how many people they cure, but how much revenue they generate. And doctors who aren't generating a lot of revenue, they will get let go. So it is all driven by the money, just this incredible amount of greed that's out there. And it's a corrupted system. And pretty much everything in the United States these days has gone the same way. We've lost our moral compass. But getting on back to getting on back to nature, we know these things work because they've been working for hundreds of years, and we shouldn't allow ourselves to get lured away by advertising. And I say that as somebody who worked in advertising many, many years ago. And I'll give you one of the real ridiculous successes of advertising was convincing young mothers that what was coming out of their bodies to feed their babies was worse for the baby than what was being cooked up in a lab. And as you know, there have been several cases where that manufactured baby formula turned out to not have everything the baby really needed, or in some cases, some toxic materials. Anyway, we're going to take a quick break for commercials. We have a caller waiting on the line with a question for you, Don, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We've got a caller on the line with a question for Don Wiskin. Daniel in British Columbia. Aloha. What's on your mind?
Oh, hey, Don. I had a question. If you happen to hear about this Harvard professor who's now claiming that coconut oil is pure poison. I couldn't believe when I heard this. I mean, these guys, they don't say anything about all the glyphosate in our children's cereal or anything about vaccines harming children. But, you could come up with something like coconut oil, which I believe is actually helping people and their health problems. And I know these Harvard types, they get a lot of their funding from big corporations. I just wondered if you heard that, and I'll take your answer off air. Thanks a lot.
But at the same time, they can come up and say anything they want. They tell you coffee is good for you. At one time, they told you cigarettes are good for you. At some point, they'll stop and say, no, coffee isn't good for you. No, chocolate's not good for you. But, they all have to sell something. But at the same time, coconut oil is supposed to be good for you. But it's right here in front of me on the New York Times. Harvard professor called coconut oil pure poison. I don't know whether it is or isn't. I don't use it myself personally, but I do like coconut.
Well, we have a lot of coconut around here, that's for sure, and I imagine by tomorrow night some of them are going to be flying all over the place, so you'll be able to pick them up on Saturday morning. I'm looking also at an article about this, and apparently this professor, Karen Michel's, is concerned over the saturated fat content of coconut oil. And I remember a while ago where they were going back and forth about the issue of cholesterol, and they were saying, all cholesterol is bad for you. All cholesterol is bad for you. Have a cholesterol drug. Then they came on back and said, well, actually, some cholesterol is good for you. The fact of the matter is that, as you pointed out, at one point they said smoking was good for us, which was partly true, because people who smoke are only half as likely to get Alzheimer's, well, there was one other that was on that list here. Anyway, but to get back to the point here, yeah, corporate media tells us what the corporations want us to believe, to steer us away from some product and towards another. And I remember when I was working in advertising, we were seeing all these campaigns about suntan products, how dangerous the sun is. And yes, melanoma is dangerous. And everybody was encouraged to buy and slather on suntan products rather than to get a big hat and a shawl and just simply cover on up. And those suntan products turned out to actually be harmful. In fact, Hawaii just banned a large range of them because they were killing off the corals. Anyway, we have about 2 minutes left here before I have to let you go. Is there anything you want to share with our listeners?
I'm still thinking about the coconut oil, Michael, and things like that. But, you know, your body, your liver produces 1,500 milligrams of cholesterol every day, whether you eat cholesterol food or not. If you eat cholesterol-producing food, it produces more. But 1,500 milligrams a day. Cholesterol is very, very important for the health of your body. It carries the nutrients out to the arteries. It helps to feed the organs. But at the same time, the cholesterol, the damage that's done in the arteries, the cholesterol becomes a Band-Aid until your arteries can repair themselves. But we're not getting the right nutrients in our diet to repair that damage. So the cholesterol buildup continues until it breaks off and causes a stroke or a heart attack, or it builds up so much it just causes a heart attack. But the ingredients in the extendivite will slowly repair that damage in your arteries, allowing the cholesterol to go back to your liver, which created it, to dispose of it. So cholesterol is very important, but excess amounts, yes, that is a problem.
Yeah, I imagine that would be. Okay, well, Don, thanks an awful lot for spending time with us again today. It's a great product. I'm using it, and it does seem to be making a difference. And I'm going to go on taking it. So thank you very much. And, oh, don't forget to give them your website again.
Oh, absolutely. I was just thinking that. Heartdrop.com. That's HEARTDROP.com. The reason I have that name is when I first started off, it was just in liquid. And so it was drops for the heart, so we called it Heart Drop 2000. So it's heartdrop.com. And also the product Extendivite, XTENDOVITE, Extend Your Life. That's what VITE is. VITE is life. So extend your life with Extendivite. And until next time, Michael, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for spending time with us. Okay, we're coming up here on another commercial break. And, excuse me. Let's see. Let's get back onto this deplatforming censorship thing. And that's going to be the topic we come back to after these words from our sponsors. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, getting on back to the deplatforming issue, and I just ran a check over the commercial break, and my Facebook and Twitter accounts are still up, but then there wouldn't be any point for them to be taken down because I haven't used them since, I think, April. But apparently, InfoWars reporter Millie Weaver ran into Jim Acosta and interviewed him about Alex Jones being banned from all these social media platforms. And Weaver called out Acosta for his hypocrisy in supporting the censorship of InfoWars while claiming he's pushing for a free press. Well, what's going on here is the corporate media has redefined free press as being them. They are the free press, and their freedom must be preserved. And the rest of us in the independent media, well, we're something else. We haven't come up with a catchy label for you yet. But yeah, it's okay to censor you. No, it isn't. The First Amendment's an absolute. Go and you read that part about freedom of speech. It doesn't say if you are part of a large corporation, or freedom of the press, only if you're a very large media organization. The technology has changed, but the principle is the same. We all have a right to speak out about issues of the day. According to an article coming out of 12160.info, Facebook is in fact now targeting left-wing pages as predicted. They're just taking them all down. They want a clear liberal field going into the midterm elections. And Facebook basically is declaring war. And Google, they went after Telesur, Alternate, Truthdig, the Jimmy Dore Show, Secular Report, and anyone else they can find who makes an honest attempt to tell the truth. Now, Google is saying it will block blatantly misleading, low-quality content. Well, would that include the Washington Post and the New York Times, who reported Iraq had nuclear weapons and lied us into a war? It should. Because if you're concerned about fake news, that was fake news. The news about Assad gassing his own people, that was fake news. All the big corporate media carried it. Spanish Mine in Havana Harbor, the Hearst newspapers made that headline news. Never existed. Torpedo in the Gulf of Tonkin. The corporate media's job is to lie to you. They are the fake news. And they're very upset that there is now a true news out here speaking back to them. And they're trying to figure out some way they can shut us down. And there is that pesky First Amendment and a Supreme Court that probably would still respect it. So they're just trying to go after the technology and find ways to just filter us out. And it's not just the independent media. I think we're seeing just how tight Facebook has become with the U.S. government because Saudi prosecutors are seeking the death penalty for a 29-year-old woman activist for crimes such as chanting slogans at a protest. And the punishment is beheading with a sword. And beheading a woman is unprecedented in the kingdom. Men, a lot of them happens all the time. Women, no. Facebook is trying to protect Riyadh's reputation, if you will. They've initiated a crackdown on hundreds of accounts that are posting content critical of the Saudi government and its behavior. So I would imagine that they got a request from the U.S. government to do that here. Now, you know your little Google Assistant that sits on the table? It now has the option that it will give you only good news, happy news. And you just say to it, tell me something good, and you'll be given a nice summary of positive stories about people solving real problems or having fun or, kittens being saved and things like that. And I think that's very dangerous. I know in doing this show, doing this website, the negative stories of all the bad things going on can be a little overwhelming. And a lot of people probably feel the same way, and they might be tempted to hit that little button and say, tell me something good. Back in the days of the Soviet Union, that was the business of Pravda and Izvestia. They just came on out, with happy news about this building's being built and all the bad things that were going on. Nope, not a word of it. Corporate media does not report the truth. Their job is to distort it, to twist it, to torture it, to turn it into something that serves the power elite. Meanwhile, Apple is trying to convince the U.S. government that iPhones are not spying on people. And apparently the Energy and Commerce Committee in Congress sent letters to Tim Cook, Apple's CEO, and Larry Page, CEO of Google's parent company, Alphabet, asking whether their smartphones listen to their users and collect data. And in its response, Apple said they do not listen to what users say. They're only listening for that unambiguous audio trigger, "Hey Siri." And they're not listening to anything else. Now, I don't know how trustworthy they are about this. We know that collecting information to sell to marketing companies is a big part of their business model. And it's kind of rough to live in an age where you literally don't trust your own property to be preserving your privacy, where everything seems to be turned against you. Okay, Intel now has a new requirement in its licensing agreement, that end-user licensing agreement, specifically aimed at people who are trying to find the performance hit from the Spectre patches. And so this new clause by Intel basically legally gags developers from revealing performance degradation caused by its mitigations for Spectre and Foreshadow, or L1 terminal fault flaw speculative attacks. And the agreement states, quote, you will not allow any third party to publish or provide any software benchmarks or comparison test results. Which tells us Intel knows the chips are really going to slow down. All right, we're going to take a phone call now from Sovereign Man. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I don't know if you're familiar with a gentleman by the name of Clint Richardson. He, not recently, but pretty recently, within a month or so, he actually was on Deanna's show, and he did a thing on the advertising from the medical industry. The website, if you pull it up, is realityblogger.wordpress.com, and that's blogger with 1G. And if you scroll down the page, I don't know where he got these ads, man, but they are wonderful. I mean, it pretty much says it all. About smoking is good for you. 3 out of 4 doctors recommend Chesterfield.
Yeah, I remember that one.
You're not driving alone.
Okay.
There's driving the car. Yeah, it's crazy, man. I can't believe it. I mean, I don't know where Clint found them, but they're a treasure trove.
I'm thinking back to this Russell Crowe movie. It was one of his first movies he did. It was called The Insider, and it was about the true story of how an insider from one of the big tobacco companies blew the whistle about how these tobacco companies were intentionally adding chemicals to the cigarettes to make them more addictive. And it was a real big stink because, the cigarette companies were saying, oh, of course these things aren't addictive. We're not making them to be addictive, and, you can quit anytime you want. But I remember, watching how hard it was for my mother to quit, which was after she'd already had the cancer. And her doctor said, why bother now? But she went ahead and did it anyway. But yeah, it's all driven by the product lines, and whatever a corporation is allowed to sell, they're going to sell. And where government is failing us is in the fact that corporations are being allowed to sell more and more less than efficacious products, some of which are actually harmful, because it's all about making money now.
It is. It's sad, and actually, what we call government really is, and it's a corporation acting as government.
Yes.
I mean, there's no two ways about it. I don't know if you ever seen that document. It's the Great American Adventure PDF. It's a document by 11 years retired federal judge, and he pretty much spelled it out.
Yeah. Actually, I don't even think of it as a corporation. I think of it as an organized crime organization, because that's all they seem to be doing.
Oh, it is, no doubt. I mean, it's just organized. It's how do you say, men and women offering you goods and services out of the barrel of a gun.
Well, I'm looking at these little ads, and I'm going to go ahead and post this during the next commercial break. But yeah, way back when, the tobacco industry, and they had a huge lobby. And if you look at all these ads saying this doctor recommends the cigarettes, it's because when these ads were coming on out, there were already people out there saying, I think these things may be bad for you. And the tobacco companies were out there saying, tobacco doesn't cause cancer. And as it turns out, technically, they were correct. It were the other chemicals they were adding in to make the cigarettes more addictive, along with the polonium from the cheap mined mineral fertilizer they were growing the tobacco plants on.
Yeah, well, they still have a big lobby. I mean, R.J. Reynolds actually ventured into the food industry.
Yes.
So now they're giving you glyphosate and MSG, all the good stuff. Oh, by the way, the coconut oil,
Yep.
It's really, really good for you. They use that in inhalation. If you mix cilantro with the coconut oil, people are having great results with the elderly coming back from like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Our brains are like 3/4 cholesterol, Mike.
Ah, okay. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I mean, they don't want you to have it because they know what it does. Just like cannabis. They didn't want us to have cannabis, even though every brain cell in every creature on the earth has natural cannabinol receptors. I mean,
well, they don't want us to have it because it's cutting into the pharmaceutical industry's profits, and also the alcohol industry's profits and the tobacco industry's profits. They're all going to try and come on down and wipe out our access to anything and force us to buy everything that we need from some corporation, to commoditize everything that's out there. Now they're doing it with water. And I have to wonder if the deterioration of our civic water systems, to where the water in much of the country is no longer safe to drink, was allowed to deliberately happen in order to commoditize water and get us to pay for it a lot more than we were paying for it before.
Yeah. Yes, we're not as wealthy as we thought we were. If you had your own well, you were wealthy.
Oh yeah, we had our own well when I lived in New England farming country. That was good
now
water
you're forced to get. Yeah, now you're forced to get the municipal water.
Well, our municipal water here is very good. When that whole Flint, Michigan thing came up, I tested the water here in our home, and except for its extreme hardness, which makes perfect sense, we're sucking it out from inside a dead volcano, we have good quality water here. The same cannot be said for the rest of the country. Anyway, Sovereign Man, I got to let you go. I'm running out of time, and I got a bunch of stories to get back to. But yeah, these ads are an amazing slice of history. But at various times before it was made illegal, you could go and they were selling products with opium in it, just over the counter, things like laudanum. Alrighty, so getting on back to the world of computers and computer science. The Democratic National Committee has now announced that a suspected attempt to hack into the Democratic National Committee's voter database was actually a cybersecurity test. In other words, a false alarm. And basically, it was their computer security firm, Lookout Incorporated, was doing a security scan, and somebody said, oh my goodness, we're being hacked, we're being hacked, we're being hacked. Here's a little interesting piece of data that just surfaced. This is over on IntelliHub. Remember Stephen Paddock? He's the guy who's been accused of the Mandalay Bay shooting, and he had a girlfriend, Marilou Danley, and it turns out that according to records obtained by IntelliHub, Marilou Danley worked for the FBI, a little fact that has been left out of the coverage of that shooting from then until now. All right, we're going to grab another phone call here. Rick in Wisconsin, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Michael, good afternoon. Aloha to you. Hope you're ready for Hurricane Lane. It's the aftermath that you got to watch out for, the looters, things like that.
Well, I don't know how much looting there's going to be. Right now, the stores are pretty much empty, and there's been a lot of panic buying going on. Again, I don't think it's going to be as big a deal as they're making out for it. For Claire and us, for Claire and I, we're up on a hill. Obviously, for people in the inundation regions along the coast, the storm surge is going to be a problem. And they're saying it could be as much as 30 inches of rain, which could trigger landslides. So it's going to be bad, but not as bad as getting hit by the actual eye of the storm.
Okay. Well, here's another reason that I called. I want to know who does your bumper music. I think it's brilliant. The We Will Not Go Down in Gaza Tonight, and the other, the What Really Happened tune.
Well, I'll tell you.
I'd really like to know.
Go to this website, wrhradio.com,
It's the website for the radio show, and about halfway down there'll be a link that says you can listen to the music of the radio show, and there's a little player that plays the full-length versions of all these songs, and there's a little button you can click that will give you the information of who these people are. They all gave us their permission to use their music, and it also includes a link over to their website. Okay, we got to take another break. Got to take a break for commercials. All right, we'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today, and we were talking about the Mandalay Bay shooting. And even back then, the social media was filtering. And apparently YouTube altered their search algorithm regarding the Mandalay Bay shooting to basically downplay the large number of videos that were asking questions about whether this was a false flag, and to promote what are laughingly called the reputable sources. Now, Verizon may be in hot water, and this has to do with these recent wildfires, because firefighters use their cell phones to communicate. And Verizon bills, and sells unlimited service. But it turns out Verizon does throttle. And apparently they were throttling during the fighting of these wildfires, and the firefighters couldn't get data back and forth, whether it was pictures or videos or just talking. So Verizon may be in a little bit of hot water about that. Getting on back to the California wildfires, a story out of Natural News is saying that basically, there's been an uptick in forest fires noticed in the 1970s, and it coincides with a legislative approach of hands-off to forest management instead of a more active management. Remember, we were talking about how the money was going away. The money was being taken out of our infrastructure and going off to war. And 1970s, of course, just getting out of Vietnam at that time. So basically, fuels for fire were mostly removed through logging and active management, which the federal government stopped. And you take that away, and you get these fire bombs. And this basically coincides with what I was saying. The reason for these fires is not global warming, but global warming policies. By the way, Stevie Wonder actually came on out saying that Aretha Franklin was killed by global warming. And that's poor taste. He's exploiting her death. And I expected better of Stevie Wonder. And remember, more than 31,000 scientists, 9,000 of them who have PhDs, have signed a petition that says this human-caused global warming is a hoax, and that global agreements limiting greenhouse gases are actually hurting life on our planet, especially plant life. And it's all backed by peer-reviewed research. We don't know what research Stevie Wonder is relying on. Now, California finally did something I find myself in agreement with. They just passed a bill where all old marijuana convictions will be erased. If you're living in California and you've got a bust for marijuana on your record, it's about to disappear as soon as Jerry Brown signs it. There's the music. Time for me to get on out of here and hunker down for the hurricane. We will try and have a live show tomorrow. It depends on whether we have electricity or not. Stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm actually going to be filling in for him for about 10 minutes, and then I'll really be getting on out of here. So stay tuned. I'll be right back. And welcome to John Stedmiller's program. Of course, I'm not John Stedmiller. I'm Michael Rivero. John's on his way in, had a little minor delay, and I'm going to basically sit in for 10 minutes to prevent dead air going on out, which would just be boring to everybody. So the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And if you had just come on over from my program, we talked about a lot of different things that were going on. And one of them, of course, being this impending hurricane, where, to be very, very honest, it's going to be bad. But I don't think it's going to be as bad as it is being represented in the corporate media, because I'm getting all these emails where they're treating this thing like it's an impending disaster. It's a repeat of Iniki. We're going to be the new Puerto Rico, and I don't think so. The hard facts are, yes, it is a Category 4 hurricane, but the eye of the storm is actually way away from land, and it's moving northward now. It's going to be closest to where I am sitting on Saturday morning, and it's predicted to weaken, but it hasn't yet. Now, Claire and I live on a hill, so we're not worried about the flooding, which is the real danger in the inundation zones. If you live here in Hawaii and you go to the state website, they used to put it in the phone book, but nobody has phone books anymore. There are literally maps where these areas are drawn out as inundation zones, where in the event of a storm surge or an incoming tsunami, you get the heck out of those places. And they've already opened shelters here on Oahu for people who are getting out of the inundation zones to go to. Schools are closed, a lot of businesses are closed. People are being told to shelter in place until the storm is over. There was a lot of panic buying. The stores are just out of things like bottled water. It's going to be bad. I don't think it's going to be quite as bad as it's made out. And this is almost reminiscent of how the media treated our recent volcanic eruption down on the Big Island, because the way it was being presented on corporate media, a lot of people thought the entire Big Island had erupted and was melting down, if not the entire state. And it really wasn't true. It was just a little tiny corner of the Big Island, which doesn't minimize the fact that it was a disaster and a tragedy for those people who lived there. But again, if you do choose to live on the side of an active volcano, every once in a while, you're going to have lava coming through your living room. And if you live here on a tropical island in the Pacific, every once in a while you get a hurricane, which is what's happening, or you get a tsunami. So, we're basically wind-proofed our little abode. And except for Claire's choir rehearsal and choir on church on Sunday, rather, we are sheltering in place. We're not going anywhere, and just battening down the hatches. We're expecting to really start seeing the activity of the storm tomorrow morning. I mean, there's been wind and rain today, but it's just one of the outer rain bands that are crossing us. Meanwhile, of course, I got my eyes glued to the satellite and just keeping watch on it. Very, very, I'm anxious about this. I've been through 2 hurricanes before, and I mean right through the middle of them. One was when I was a kid living in New England. There was this hurricane that came up right along the Atlantic coast, and it went inland right over the town where I lived, and the eye went right over us. And the second one was I was on Kauai when Hurricane Iniki hit. And I don't really have much interest in seeing another hurricane close up again at my age. Of course, it's not really up to me. And I do love a good thunderstorm. I love thunder and lightning. I'd like to take pictures of thunder and lightning. Claire, not so much. And I remember I was on Kauai also for, my first wedding. Claire's my second wife. And there was a major tropical thunderstorm that came through. Not a hurricane, wasn't cyclonic, but it was pretty impressive. It shut a lot of stuff down here. And we spent our wedding night literally walking up one floor to a different room to get out of the storm surge, because that can get really serious. All right, so what's going on here in the news all day long? Have you noticed how this Molly dropped out of the news? This Molly Tibbetts. She was big headlines when she went missing. Oh, this poor innocent Iowa girl, she was out jogging and, was it her ex-boyfriend, blah, blah, blah. And they were making a big deal about it. And then all of a sudden they find out that an illegal immigrant was the murderer, and the corporate media drops the story because it doesn't fit the narrative. Okay, I have been told that John John the Great is here and ready to take over the microphone.
Oh, no, great. I don't know about that. Thanks. We had a little emergency I had to tend to here at the network. And I heard you when I was coming in studio talking about the hurricane. Now, I guess you haven't had one there of this size since, what, 1992?
Yeah, it's the biggest in 25 years. And, Hurricane Harvey was pretty large, too, but it missed us by a wide margin. The concern for this one is it is very, very close. But as I mentioned, the eye of the storm itself, the most destructive winds, are well out to the west of us. But everybody's taking this thing seriously. All of the ships and submarines in Pearl Harbor were ordered to sail off to the northeast as far away as they could so they wouldn't get banged against the docks by the storm surge.
Well, remember the last time the good ships were sent out of the harbor? I think that was December 7th.
All right, I'll keep my eyes open for those Japanese planes.
Hey, by the way, you were talking about the thing that happened in Iowa. Did you notice that this young girl that was murdered by this illegal looked a lot like Jodi Arias?
I hadn't really noticed.
Yeah, it was striking. That's one thing that I did notice. Hey, you got a birthday coming up. You're going to take a few days off. I sent you an email and I told you, this birthday stuff, that's a conspiracy by the Hallmark people and card companies. You were only birthed once, my friend, and everything after that is just a remembrance day.
It's a good point, and you're right. It's all a conspiracy pushed by the greeting card companies. Anyway, I need to get on out of here and have a good show. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
All right, thanks, Mike. I appreciate it.